Research Associate at the School of Oriental and African Studies in the University of London. Previously, he held the position of Senior Researcher Associate at the Research Unit Intellectual History of the Islamic World in Berlin. He has published numerous studies on the cross connections between Islamic, Christian, and Jewish religious thought. Gregor, please.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Zvi, and all the team in Toronto for organizing this event. It's admittedly for me the first time to be on this continent, so special event. And our panel now is going a century and a half backwards to a Karaite thinker who was active in the second third of the 11th century in Jerusalem. And the text which will be the focus of this second session is his Risala fi Jawab al-Masail Mushkila fi Tarkib. So basically treatise on intricate questions about unlawful sexual relationships. Tarkib is usually translated as compounding or chain reaction. And more specifically, its introduction. As is well known, the treatise, both its Arabic original and the Byzantine Hebrew translation by Yaakov ben Shimon, still translated during the lifetime of the author, had a sustained impact on later Karaite legal literature and legal practice in Byzantium, Egypt, and beyond. This reception history does not concern us here, and it has partially been studied by Jacob Mann, Zvi Ankeri, and others. These scholars have also shed some light on the relation of Yeshua's Risala to earlier critics of what Ankeri called Askolat HaMerakvim HaVatika, especially those by David Ben Boaz and Yusuf al-Basir. I will not go into this prehistory of the Tarkib doctrine, but it should at least be recalled here that Yeshua was not its first detractor. To modern scholarship, Yeshua's Risala has been known under the title of its Hebrew translation as Sefer HaYashar for a couple of centuries. Moritz Steinschneider included a detailed description of two manuscripts from the Warner collections at the University Library, the Library of the Rijksuniversiteit in Leiden. And as you know, these days you can see all those manuscripts online, can be accessed by everybody for free. So that is one of those manuscripts from the Warner collection with containing the Hebrew translation of the text that concerns us here. A few years after Steinschneider published his catalog, Simcha Pinsker drew on manuscripts at the St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences and incorporated excerpts from Sefer HaYashar into his Likutei Kadmoniot. And at the turn of the century, so at the end of the 19th century, the Goldseer student Martin Schreiner included a transcript based on the Warner manuscripts and a German summary of the introduction in his Studien über Yeshua ben Yehuda. And finally, in 1908, Yitzhak Makon presented an edition of Sefer HaYashar as first and sadly also last volume of what he planned to become a series entitled Mekorot Lekorot Dinei Nashim Ve'arayot Etzel HaKaraim Yotzim Le'or Al Bikit Ve'yad Ivreim Ve'aravim. There's never been a text based on an Arabic source in this series. The Arabic original of Sefer HaYashar has hardly been studied so far. And one of your articles is one of the few exceptions on the book of the precepts by Anan about, he was specifically writing about Aramaic in Arabic script, which is based on excerpts in Yeshua's Risala from Anan's book of precepts. Apart from a few gaps in the text, the bulk of the treatise has been preserved in about 20 manuscript fragments in either Arabic or Hebrew script. So to show you just a couple of pictures, that is one of the manuscripts in Hebrew script. And so I have here a transcript of the entire treatise, of which you have a part, the end of the introduction, on the handout. And as I said, there's about 80% or 20% of the Arabic texts seem to be lacking, even though I haven't seen or systematically gone through all the known manuscripts in Arabic. In 2003, I had the first time the opportunity to go through the manuscript of the Arabski section of the second Firkovich collection at the Russian National Library, which this section has not been microfilmed for the NLI in Jerusalem. And that's where I discovered a substantial part of the introduction inserted in a unique copy of Abdel Jabbar's Ta'liq al-Muhit. So a ta'liq on his Muhit. As mentioned in the abstract, I don't know whether the abstracts were distributed, but in the abstract to my paper I wrote that Martin Schreiner studied, in 1900, studied the introduction of Yeshua's Risala as a specimen of a Mu'tazili work on legal methodology. So that was his main objective in 1900. In absence of pertinent primary sources by Muslim authors, he quite rightly regarded this text as a subsidiary gateway to understanding the Mu'tazili approach to legal methodology and legal hermeneutics. This is the Arabic script manuscript which was inserted in a manuscript of a text by Abdel Jabbar, which is not identified, so it was together with a manuscript by Abdel Jabbar, because the script is somehow similar, but the size of the paper is different, and you see immediately that these fragments come from a different codex. And on the next slide, I have this quotation from Martin Schreiner, where he says, basically on the next page, that dagegen haben wir in der Einleitung des Yeshua ben Yehuda ein mu'tazilitisches Werk über die Usul al-Fiqh. Given the intricacy of the Byzantine Hebrew translation, this was a rather strenuous task. 170 years later, we have access to numerous Mu'tazili Usul al-Fiqh treatises which offer contemporary readers the introduction to Yeshua's Risala, a plethora of new comparative material. So just here I have an overview of what kind of Mu'tazili kind Usul al-Fiqh, including the later Zaidi tradition, we have access to today, many of them not edited, but still, just to say what kind of different documentary material we have available today as compared to the year 1900. The introduction covers roughly 1/4 of the entire treatise. So this is the structure of the entire Risala, and the Muqaddimah in color is about 1/4 of the entire text. The main body of the treatise is divided into two parts. The first discusses and refutes the 6 main scriptural proof texts invoked by Ashab al-Tarkib, so the proponents of the Tarkib doctrine, while the second consists of lengthy, critically annotated quotations from Anan's Book of Precepts, the 11th Maqala of Al-Qirqisani's Kitab al-Anwar wal-Maraqib. And as we said, that several manuscripts which have been classified as manuscripts of Kitab al-Anwar are actually covering quotations from Yeshua's Risala. The last chapter critically examines relevant texts from the rabbinic tradition, above all passages from the Mishnaic tractate Yevamot and from Halachot Gedolot. Even though Yeshua's Risala does not refer to Samaritan interpretations of Leviticus 18 or Samaritan legal literature on forbidden marriages, it should be noted here that several Samaritan authors of the 11th and 12th centuries were well familiar with the relevant Karaite literature and on the subject, including Yeshua's Risala. Another slide shows the cross-connection between the Risala and its introduction to later works by Yeshua. The Risala belongs to the earlier works of Yeshua ben Yehuda. It was most likely written in the early 1040s. The introduction broaches several theological and hermeneutical questions, which were later treated in far more detail in Kitab Tawriyah, the Book of Concealment. Kitab Tawriyah was written in late 1046 and explicitly refers to the introduction of the Risala. The main body of the Risala provided in all likelihood not only the blueprint for the so-called long commentary on Leviticus, but was seen by Yeshua as being part of one and the same project. So now we come to the main focus of our talk, the introduction itself. The beginning of the introduction identifies its subject matter as being el-kalam fil-lugha wal-muwada, discussion on language and the mutually agreed assignment of meanings to words, if we want to translate the expression a bit freely. The very phrasing of the subject matter establishes a direct link to the opening section of Usul al-Fiqh treatises, especially those authored by Mutakallimun. From the late 10th century onwards, full-fledged introductory expositions of theories of language and meaning, covering a wide range of language-related issues and pertinent epistemological problems, became the hallmark of introductions to Usul al-Fiqh treatises. Of the edited works from that period, one may refer here to Abu Hussein al-Basri's Kitab al-Mu'tamad or the Shiite scholar Abu Ja'far al-Tusi's Kitab al-Utta fi Usul al-Fiqh. A century and a half after the Risala was written, a book like Fakhr al-Din al-Razi's Kitab al-Mahsul fi Ilm al-Usul, in this text, the opening section entitled Al-Kalam fil-Lughat covers no less than 120 pages. So, that Yeshua was well acquainted with this literature, above all Abdul Jabbar's Kitab al-Ummat and the commentary thereupon, Sharh al-Ummat, is apparent from his explicit references and citations in all of his major works. In the Risala, he explicitly refers to Abdul Jabbar's discussion of preponderance, al-kalam fil tarjihat, that is the weighing up of conflicting legal indications. That's what I spoke already, or what is left? Okay. Okay. And in the introduction, he quotes, he refers to discussions by Abu Ali al-Jubai, so Mu'tazili of the late 9th century, about specific action theoretical positions. Throughout his work, Yeshua repeatedly discusses ontological, epistemological, and hermeneutical dimensions of language and speech. Apart from the introduction to the Risala, the most detailed treatments of these issues are found in the long commentary on the Ten Commandments, above all in the commentary on the first verse of Exodus 20, furthermore in Kitab al-Tawriyah, and in the commentary known as Breshit Rabbah, even though some people, probably rightly so, doubt Yeshua's authorship of that text, it obviously contains material deriving from Yeshua, and the section on Muwada found in that text shows close parallels to the introduction of our Risala. So this is a slide giving the subject area of the entire book as Al-Kalam fi Lugha wa Muwada, and here the structure of the introduction itself. Notwithstanding that the fact that our introduction precedes a treatise on unlawful sexual relationships, the scope and focus of its subject matter reaches well beyond this specific area of application. It propounds a theory of language and meaning which applies to the entire enterprise of scriptural and legal interpretation. Indeed, its main goal is to establish a typology of ways by which sounds and words acquire meanings, and to show that and how this typology bears on legal interpretation, the legal force and the legal scope of revealed texts. The introduction opens with its own introduction, introducing some basic terminology, concepts and procedures that should help the non-expert to find his bearings in legal matters. There's mostly epistemological questions treated here, which I cannot go into. Now, the first chapter of the introduction is entitled Chapter Giving an Outline of the Conditions of Linguistic Convention, of what I previously called the mutually agreed assignment of meanings to words. At this point, Yeshua explicates that the goal of the introduction, and here he calls it ta'aliq, that's suggested to me that ta'aliq in this context could even mean a close relationship to a source text, but that's another question. So Yeshua explicates that the goal of the introduction is limited to explaining the concept of law-based semantic assignment. However, since this type of semantic assignment is only understood in relation to the underlying concept of the primordial semantic assignment, the latter needs to be dealt with in the first place. The chapter first determines the goal of muwada, this semantic assignment, mutually agreed semantic assignment, as being the conveyance of the speaker's intentions, and then discusses in detail 7 preconditions for the possibility of its existence. The exposition of these preconditions covers about 60% of the introduction and exhibits multiple cross-connections to parallel discussions of muwada'a in the 5th volume of Abdel Jabbar's Murni, where the reader is referred to the author's Kitab al-Nihaya fi Usul al-Fiqh for a more elaborate treatment of this topic. Like Yeshua, Abdel Jabbar states at the outset that the relation, ta'alluq, between signified and signified word and meaning is grounded in the intent of the speaker. Words don't have meanings independent of the speaker's intent. There exists no intrinsic relation between the composition and form of words and their meaning. The relation is arbitrary and may alter over time. Secondly, the purpose of assigning meanings to words is essentially communicative. The act of the will that makes speech meaningful is not the speaker's intent that his speech have a certain meaning, but intent that it has a specific communicative effect on the hearer. A valid verbal form is necessary for the speech to fulfill the speaker's communicative intent, but it does not determine meaning or its meaning. Yes, okay. Shortly, just these 7 conditions for the possibility of this semantic assignment go as basic as that we have the capacity to speak, that speak has the same structure as other human actions, so it's basically relating speech acts to a more comprehensive theory of action, and that speech acts follow a certain pattern of afal muhkama, so that basically a speech act must have the structure of a person who acts with a certain competence and knowledge. The fourth condition states that the relation between sounds and words and meanings depends on the speaker's will, as I mentioned before. The fifth condition states that the starting point of the primordial semantic assignment and says that this starting point is pointing. And explains why communication through mutually agreed sound patterns is easier to handle than paralinguistic conventions such as body language or deictic sign language, and that it offers a wider spectrum of differentiation. Since the primary semantic assignment is based on pointing, that is sense perception, it has a higher level of epistemological security. In the parlance of the Mutakallimun, this is known as necessary knowledge. It also means that the possibility of revelation and divine speech is conditioned by the existence of a language. God speaking into a linguistic void would be an act of futility and therefore morally bad, and of offending the basic principle of divine wisdom and justice. It also means that the meaning of God's speech cannot be known by necessity. The access to meanings of God's speech is always inferential. The sixth condition determines that the primordial semantic assignment is rationally good and does not depend on divine authorization. So here he argues against three specific groups, including the Ash'arites, who say that there is no possibility, no justification or legitimacy to assign meanings to words without divine authorization. And again, this entire discussion is quite extensive and shows very close parallels to Abdul Jabbar's discussion in the morning. The main target of the following chapter on the distinction between the primary original usage, haqiqa, and the secondary diverted usage of words, majaz, is to show that the latter usage is strictly conditioned by the particular context of its application and therefore not transferable to other contexts and not suitable as basis for legal analogy. If the contextual conditions of a diverted usage are not met or unknown to the hearer will have to resort to the primary default usage of the word. The implications of this distinction between default and diverted usages of words on the interpretation of divine speech acts is the subject of the following chapter on the law-based semantic assignment, which is basically what you have part of it on the handout. God's speech acts, which lack most of the non-verbal contextual clues available in interhuman communications, are said to be subject to a clarity requirement. In order to realize, I just finished this paragraph and then we will probably have more time in the next part of the session. So God must, this clarity requirement says that in order to realize the intended communicative value of his speech acts, God must ensure that those who must act upon his speech are able to discern what he means. If it were possible for God to conceal the meaning of even a single utterance, the entirety of his speech would lose its evidentiary value and would become epistemologically useless. If his speech does not indicate his intent in one instance, it can never convey his intent at any point. All this would pervert the rationally established principle of God's wisdom and justice. These pages of the introduction contain the nucleus of Kitab al-Tawriyah, which represents a systematic and comprehensive attempt at laying a theoretical theological foundation for the semiotic stability of revelation. 。    。 So we probably will have the possibility to look a bit closer at the text later on, but so that's what I said so far is the part of the introduction which leads to the text that is included on the handout. The text on the handout is the concluding part of the introduction, addressing the basic notion of law-based semantic assignment. So a semantic assignment which is based on explicit information stated in the revealed text and gives words a meaning they don't have in the primordial semantic assignment. And most importantly, for the treatise on forbidden sexual relationships, that these kind of law-based assignment do not allow for extrapolation. So these kind of meanings cannot be applied to similar or parallel cases. They are strictly confined to the explicit context they are meant for in Scripture. And based on this argumentation, he will basically attack basic interpretive mistakes of Ashab al-Tarkib. So the old proponents of the Tarkib doctrine are basically attacked on the basis of the argument that law-based semantic assignments cannot be the basis of qiyas. And so that's part of what you will find in the text on the handout. Yeah. So
Thank you.
It is my mistake that the people who are expected to discuss my paper didn't see my paper in advance, but I trusted the ingenuity of their immediate capture of my shortcomings that would be enough to react to what I was presenting to you right now.
Thank you so much. I hope there will be additional time to expand in the following discussion. The first